I have to tread dangerous waters now, because I got to talk about the raw politics of the moment. Oh gosh, I know what's going to happen just by going down this road, and I might as well just like delete my Twitter account. So Donald Trump has a lot of very aggressive supporters on Twitter, and they have a lot of apologetics. So let me begin with what is apologetics. Apologetics is simply a defense of something. It's not apologizing as in saying I'm sorry. If you're an apologist, you're a defender. You give a defense. So Christian apologetics, a defense of the faith. When the skeptic says, why does this happen in one of the gospels, but the same story has something different happen in the other gospels, and what's your defense of it? And there are defenses of it. A lot of the things that seem out of place in the Gospels have good defenses based on writing style, who's writing, who's the audience, things like that. Like one of the very famous ones is the possessed men in the cemetery that the demons are cast in the herd of pigs. In one story, it's one person, and in another gospel, it's two men. Why one man in one and two men in the other? Well, if you understand who the writing is to and what the style is, and those who are writing to a very traditional Jewish audience would have put the focus on just one person, not two people, because that was the pattern and practice of the day in writing. When you're writing to a broader audience, you fill out the story more. You got a bigger story. It depends on the writing styles, things like that. There are apologetics classes to teach you the answers to the big questions, and people have apologists as well. The apologetics of the stolen election in 2020 is something I've just given up on talking to people about why I don't see 2020 as stolen, because they all have questions and claims and theories. And those who are big believers are the most diehard apologists. They have all the answers, and that they have the quibbles and the twists of truth and things like that. It's just there's no reason to even engage. You won't convince them. They won't convince you. Why bother? Donald Trump has very hardcore apologists. Why didn't he win in 2020? Well, it was stolen. So how can he win in 2024? Well, COVID's not around now, so they won't be able to steal it in the way they did in 2020. It actually is impressive. It really is impressive. Ron DeSantis has his own apologists, and they may, in my corner of the internet, be more vigorous than those of Donald Trump at this point. Only Ron DeSantis can beat Donald Trump. That's what the DeSantis apologists will tell you. If Nikki Haley is rising in the polling, well, Donald Trump's not firing at her. He must not take her seriously. Well, yes, but Ron DeSantis wasn't firing at her either until she started rising in the polls, so he didn't take her seriously, and now she's suddenly tied with him. Well, it doesn't matter because only Ron DeSantis can beat Donald Trump. It's remarkable apologetics from supporters of Ron DeSantis. There is some truth in the apologetics for DeSantis. DeSantis' supporters are willing to go to Donald Trump more than Nikki Haley supporters are. So if Ron DeSantis drops out, that helps Ron DeSantis, or that helps Donald Trump. If Nikki Haley supporters drop out, well, that might help Ron DeSantis. The problem is DeSantis decided to put all of his eggs in the Iowa basket, and Haley put all the eggs in the New Hampshire basket. Haley is now ahead of Ron DeSantis in New Hampshire, but Haley's debate performances have caused people to give her a second look, and she's now tied with Ron DeSantis in Iowa in the Anselzer polling, which is notable polling. DeSantis, this is just the truth. Don't hate me for telling you guys the truth. DeSantis has declined. Now, you can say, and I do believe it's fair to say, yes, DeSantis had these massive poll numbers in January, but he wasn't a candidate in January. He waited to get in, and the polling declined over time. The problem is that he's now been in for quite a while, and his polling hasn't really improved, while other candidates, particularly Nikki Haley and Donald Trump's polling, has improved. For those who think Mike Pence's supporters, of which there were some, and maybe it's only 3 or 4%, But to say, well, they'll all go to Ron DeSantis now, no, they'll probably go to Nikki Haley. The people who are with Mike Pence are more conservative than populist, and like Mike Pence himself, they're a little skeptical of Ron DeSantis' path forward with his populist rhetoric. Those people seem to be a better fit to Nikki Haley. Every Ron DeSantis supporter I know is convinced that when any other candidate drops out, their support goes to Ron DeSantis. And the DeSantis supporters are the only ones who think that. Most other people are kind of convinced at this point, no. Chris Christie drops out, probably goes to Nikki Haley, not DeSantis. Mike Pence drops out, probably goes to Nikki Haley, not DeSantis. Tim Scott drops out, probably goes to Nikki Haley, not DeSantis. Because Nikki Haley and those candidates are more aligned rhetorically in style and in substance than Ron DeSantis. There's a problem, however. DeSantis drops out. His votes go to Donald Trump, who's already at 50% nationwide. He's at 43% in Iowa, who would cross over 50% probably if Ron DeSantis dropped out. And so all of that gets me to this. The big winner of a Nikki Haley surge is Donald Trump. The reality is there should be only three people in the race: Donald Trump, Nikki Haley, and Ron DeSantis. The reality is this is a race between Donald Trump, Nikki Haley, and Ron DeSantis, and it's not much of a race because Donald Trump is winning pretty decisively. Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis are only holding Donald Trump beneath 50% in some state polling. If either drops out, it probably helps Donald Trump. And if both stay in, it helps Donald Trump. Donald Trump is set to be the Republican nominee the way this is shaping out. However, events change things. It is very probable that before we get to Super Tuesday, Donald Trump will be a convicted felon, whether you like it or not. He probably will be a convicted felon. Not only that, but more likely than not, Donald Trump will be losing a significant fortune because this civil trial that the Attorney General of New York is running against him with a judge who clearly hates Donald Trump is going to get the better of him. He will suffer financially. I think Ron DeSantis is right. Ron DeSantis was on TV over the weekend and said, had the Alvin Bragg indictment not happened, this would be a different race. And he's right. The Alvin Bragg indictment caused a huge surge of Trump support and circled the wagons. And I don't know that all the support reflected in the polling is real, but I tend to believe that the trend lines of all the polls averaged together is a pretty good indicator of what's going on. And that still has Donald Trump significantly ahead. So Donald Trump probably going to be the Republican nominee. May God have mercy on all of us to go through the 2020 election again. Events change things, however. Being found guilty, possibly being carted off to jail. I actually think it's probable he'll be found guilty, improbable he'll be carted off to jail. But the amount of money he'll be spending on lawyers and probably undergoing a breakup of his businesses, that could genuinely affect this race. External events will change things. And all the candidates right now are relying on external events, except Haley on her own is rising. I put this tweet up earlier today. Nikki Haley's rise is real. Her opponents have dismissed it so often and so loudly, they're now taking to airing attack ads against her. Her rise in Iowa complicates DeSantis' path because she outperforms him in New Hampshire right now, and it's more likely Pence fans go her way. The DeSantis fans are right now on my social media having an absolute meltdown. They make a good point that if Nikki Haley drops out, the odds of her supporters going to Trump aren't huge. If Ron DeSantis drops out, the odds of his supporters going to Trump is huge. And they're absolutely right. The problem, though, is that all this sets up Donald Trump to be the nominee because Haley's going nowhere and DeSantis is going nowhere, and that leaves Trump on top, barring external events shaking up the race. That's just the reality of it. But this isn't good for Ron DeSantis. And for all of my DeSantis friends, of whom I have many, and I like him and his campaign, you got to understand reality here is that his campaign isn't really catching fire like they expected. He's floundering in the low teens everywhere. He hasn't surged while Nikki Haley has. He hasn't caught lightning in a bottle. He hasn't done the things he needs to do to maintain traction in sport. Although he's fundraised well, he needs to start putting up some ads for himself in these states, and I think he can turn it around. But you got to acknowledge reality, and reality right now is that Ron DeSantis isn't doing fantastic and Nikki Haley's surging. And you can be as dismissive as you want about Nikki Haley surging, but Ron DeSantis is not. I like them both. I know Nikki Haley. I'm friends with Nikki Haley. I know Ron DeSantis. I don't have a relationship with him, but I know him. I think Ron DeSantis would be a great president. And if you've listened to this program for the last 2 years, a lot of you think I'm a Ron DeSantis supporter because I talk about him so much, because he tends to be, in my mind, the one who's best likely to hold together the Republican coalition while bringing Trump's voters into the fold. That makes sense to me. That's how I see it. But I also see my friend Nikki Haley doing way better than anyone expected and surging in the polling because she's hit the right notes. She hasn't burned out. She hasn't peaked too soon. She's continuing to surge. And I think Nikki Haley could also preserve the coalition and get some of the Trump supporters to come her way too. The DeSantis people say that's impossible. Only DeSantis can do that. I think they're wrong. None of this is worth arguing about. But here's the bottom line. If you support Ron DeSantis, you do have to recognize the trend lines and the polling averages are not good for him. And you can say those polls are wrong. You can say they're bad. You can say they're malicious. You can say they're PR. You can say whatever you want. But the trend line for DeSantis is bad, and the trend line for Haley is good. And together, that makes a good thing for Donald Trump. If the election were held tomorrow, Donald Trump would be the nominee. The upside is that the election's not going to be held tomorrow. And because the election's not going to be held tomorrow, DeSantis has time to turn it around. But DeSantis made the conscious decision to go all in on Iowa. Nikki Haley made the conscious decision to go all in New Hampshire. And Nikki Haley is now in second place in New Hampshire, and she's on the upswing in Iowa without having done a whole lot other than having a commanding performance. So how does Ron DeSantis expand the map? Because right now, Nikki Haley has expanded her map, and Ron DeSantis has not expanded his. And all this does is help Donald Trump. So the DeSantis campaign has some serious thinking to do as to how they regroup, retool, and advance. And if it's a slugfest against Nikki Haley on the debate stage, good luck with that. She's a great debater. She's held up against Vivek Ramaswamy, and she'll hold her on against Ron DeSantis, whose campaign has been mischaracterizing her position on bringing people in from Gaza. Listen, this is not anti-DeSantis, and part of the problem is when you hear a criticism, a lot of people who support a candidate hear it as criticism of that candidate or you're against that candidate. I'm not. I'm just telling you the truth. We have two candidates in the race beyond Donald Trump that matter. One of them is trending up, one of them is trending down, and the one who's trending down is the one who's convinced only he can beat Donald Trump, and yet he's about to get beaten by Nikki Haley, so he needs to figure something out and stop complaining about Nikki Haley and the rest of us who are pointing out what's going on and figure out how to get himself trending back up instead of just screaming that the polls are rigged. This is just reality, even if you don't like it.